G'day everybody, my name is Elliot Waters and you're listening to the Dysregulated podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Alright, so today's episode, I'll give you a bit of context. I've just delivered an hour-long presentation online, a webinar for the Black Dog Institute. How good is technology? So I'm sitting here, as you'd be aware, in God's country, also known as Newcastle, New South Wales. And my audience today was an audience down in Victoria. Which I just think it's amazing that, this afternoon I was able to talk to some Victorians about mental health sitting here in Newcastle just on my computer. I don't know, I reckon that's cool. Anyway, it was my first presentation for a while. I'll tell you what, I felt rusty. I felt very rusty. What I wanted to do originally was actually record it and put it up as an episode on the podcast. And in future, I certainly want to do that. But yeah, I felt rusty. It's been a while since I've done one. And I just get so anxious, I'm like, oh no, how do I use Zoom? How do I screen share? And, how do I let people in the waiting room? There's people waiting. How do I get them in? Zoom's so technical, I can't figure it out. And this happens every time I do one of these online presentations. I have a mini meltdown because I can't figure the technology out, even though all I need to do is just breathe and be calm and anchor myself to the moment, because I've done this plenty of times. We know what to do. We just need to calm the anxiety down, just breathe, and step by step do what we need to do. And get the Zoom thing going and make sure the webcam's on and I'm screen sharing my slides, and then away we go. So I was very anxious though, very anxious for this one. It's been playing on my mind for the last few days. Usually when I do these presentations, especially when I first started, I wouldn't sleep right 3 nights leading up to it. And that happened. Thankfully, it's not usually 3 nights now, but the night before definitely is always broken sleep. And that's happened yesterday. And this has really been playing on my mind. I've known that this was coming for a while now. This presentation has been booked in for quite a few weeks now. And this is my first one in probably 4 months, I'd say, 5 months even. So yes, I was very anxious, but we got through it. And that's the main thing. And I always say to the audiences, I've been through all my diagnoses on this podcast many times, but there's probably two, I would say, in particular, that make doing these presentations, whether it's in person or online, very, very difficult. The first one is social anxiety disorder, and the second one is my Asperger's or high-functioning autism. So the social anxiety it's basically my inner critic harnesses the social anxiety so it can tell me that, my audience are judging me negatively in some way. Maybe my shirt's not ironed properly, or, I'm slouchy, I need to stand up straight, or I didn't quite get that point out, I'm mumbling a bit, people are going to think they don't know what I'm talking about, and then it snowballs from there. And when I first started doing these many years ago, 10 years ago, it used to really be a problem. And I found it very, very difficult to push back against and get on with the job at hand, which was the talk about mental health, my favourite. But social anxiety makes it really hard, because if I'm standing up in front of people, and they're all looking at me, I'm thinking my automatic response is they're all judging me, and it's in a negative way. And when I do these webinars, I actually think it's worse, because I'm imagining people sitting on their computers doing exactly the same thing, judging me and all that sort of stuff. But I can't actually see their faces. So at least when I do the in-person presentations, I can sort of get some feedback from people, It's like, okay, they laughed at that joke. That's a good thing. They smiled when I did that anecdote, which, was a positive thing, or they look really engaged when I talk about, I don't know, a personal story or something like that. But with these webinars, I'm not getting any feedback, and I need feedback. And that's part of the Asperger's high-functioning autism thing, makes it hard, because, when I present, you got to try and make eye contact if you can. And that is so hard for me in general conversation, but standing up in front of all these people, that's one thing. The webinar, I guess, that mode of delivery, it isn't as much of a problem, but yeah, certainly, standing up there and trying to come up with a concise way to explain what I'm talking about, and, do it in a way that's understandable and easily digestible. I have found that some of those social skills or those social deficits that perhaps I have because of Asperger's, which, don't get me wrong, I've done pretty well at overcoming, hence the presentations, I do have a bit of bit of trouble there. And when I'm a bit rusty like I was today, again, the inner critic's just like, mate, you're too autistic. They don't understand what you're talking about, You're not like everyone else. You're too different. They don't get it. which I hope I'm not that different. But it appeared that my audience was very receptive to my message today, and that's great. So it's good to get the first one out of the way because there's a few more coming up. And I will try and record them and get them up on the podcast because I don't know, I think they're pretty good. This is where the whole idea of a podcast sort of started, was because I do these presentations and people used to always say to me at the end, oh, you should have a podcast, you should tell people your story. So that's one of the reasons why this podcast has come about. But I also say, like I said, I want to try and convey a positive message. Now, although the process of doing these presentations overall, I would say I do not enjoy, the real take-home message, I think, especially for the kids, when I present to schools, I really try and push this, which is, look at me. I'm standing up here, and although I've got all these things going on, and I've got this inner critic that's just running me down, blah, 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 I'm sweating bullets, my hands are shaking, my voice is a bit shaky, I'm just doubting everything that I say and everything that I do. And that I think all you guys, my audience, say at the schools are all judging me. The fact of the matter is I'm still up here getting it done. And that's sort of, or one of the take-home messages, I suppose, that I try and convey to the audience, which is there's all these reasons why I shouldn't be doing this right now, but I'm up here and I'm doing it. I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job of it, but at the same time, I'm still up here giving it a go. And I want that, to be a message that, if you're really committed to something, you can get beyond these mental illnesses. I shouldn't be able to do these presentations in front of, when I do 1,000 people, like whole schools or whatever. And I'm not talking myself up here, but at the same time, or I hope not, but at the same time, I think I deserve, a bit of creds for this sort of stuff. And I'm trying to be, nice to the self. That's one of my new things at the moment, actually being a bit kind to the self. I think it's pretty cool that in spite of these mental illnesses that I've got, that I'm still able to get up there and talk to all ththese people and come out with something that not only makes sense to people, but actually, from what I gather, actually helps. That is so cool. So, and it's a privilege to be able to tell my story, of course, and have people listening. That's great too. But yes, so Black Dog presentation, I got this first one in a long time out of the way. I felt very rusty. I said that at the start and at the end that I felt rusty, and I was assured that I didn't sound rusty, and they would never have known if I didn't say that it's my first presentation in a while. But it did feel a bit clunky, but at the same time, that's probably that perfectionism and that inner critic and all that sort of stuff. One thing that I did notice, though, that wasn't apparent was imposter syndrome. And that was interesting. I thought that halfway through, I was like, this is different. So again, when I first started doing these presentations, like 10 years ago, I've been doing them for a decade now, which is pretty cool. I need to have a celebration. Anyway, 10 years ago, when I first started doing this, you got to remember too, I only had 2 diagnoses 10 years ago, which was major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. All the rest of them, the ACD, the social anxiety, the BPD, the ADHD, what else is there? I don't know, Asperger's, bipolar, all that sort of stuff. That wasn't part of the picture. Back then, it was just depression and anxiety. I used to get a bit of imposter syndrome because I knew back then, 10 years ago, that, depression, generalized anxiety, that doesn't quite cover, how I feel and how I present, in the world and, how my behaviors manifest. Or, this was before I did a psychology degree and stuff, but I knew within me that there was more to this story, maybe some more complexity, but I had no idea what that was, and I didn't know the means to find out either. So when I first started doing these presentations, I was talking from a position of somebody who was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, but I knew there was more to it. So I had a real problem with imposter syndrome, and I would doubt often whether there was actually something wrong with me or whether I was actually anxious or am I even depressed. So in those early days, it was really difficult to push past that imposter syndrome. But I don't know, maybe there's been enough evidence now in my life to show that no, these mental illnesses are real and, you battle them every day, which I certainly do. Maybe I've finally accepted that in a way because there was no real hint of imposter syndrome today. And that is great. Yes, the inner critic needs, there's a lot of work to be done there, that's for sure. But the imposter syndrome, not really an issue today. And that's That's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. That's very, very positive. So yeah, that's sort of a bit of a rundown of this sort of presentation stuff that I did today. Actually, if you're a listener of the show, but you would like, this is more for Australian listeners, but you would like me to present, whether it's in person, especially if you're New South Wales based, because I do travel around a bit, or on webinar, which could be anyone across the country, probably internationally. If anyone wants to hear me talk or give a presentation, you can request me to do so. You can book me in. So you send an email to community@blackdog.org.au. So community@blackdog.org.au and say, we want a presentation, whether it's for teenagers and high school kids, whether it's for a community group like a footy team, whether it's for, a workplace. It doesn't matter. There's different presentations, and I talk across all those different sort of domains. If you email community@blackdog.org.au and say, I want the best speaker that you've got, they'll say, Elliot is the man. Maybe. But yes, you can request me, and I will be more than happy to give one of these presentations for you and your school or your community group or your workplace, definitely. So, because it's, I don't enjoy doing these presentations, the lack of sleep and stuff the night before, which used to be, when I first started, like the whole week leading up to these presentations, I never used to sleep very well. And now over time, I've worked on that, and it's only the night before now, which is where I don't sleep very well. So I'm a bit tired as I'm sitting here talking right now, but, it used to be a lot worse. But I don't really enjoy the process of doing these presentations because it is so anxiety provoking. The inner critic does run wild a bit. There's a lot of negativity that comes with it. But I'll tell you what, being able to go out of my comfort zone and present and I think do a decent job, convey the message that I'm trying to convey, and do it, in the Elliot way, like that's pretty cool. And there's not much better highs than when I finish these presentations, because that dopamine is just flooding in, because it's like, yep, we've overcome a lot of insecurity to be able to do this presentation today, and we've done a great job. We deserve a pat on the back for that. So well done, Elliot. Great work. He's back. Elliot is back, not only on the podcast here today, but I'm back doing my presentations as well. So there you go. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. I do appreciate it. If you're enjoying the show, of course, you can follow me on Instagram at elliot.t.waters. You can follow the show at thedysregulated.podcast. You can also like, subscribe, and share the podcast around with your mates or anyone you think may benefit from listening to me waffle. And if you could give us a 5-star rating as well on Spotify, that would be great for the algorithm as well. Almost at 50, about to get the half century. So very exciting. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. As always, I do appreciate it. And I'll see you next time here on the Dysregulated Podcast.